Welcome to aminacademy.com. Human anatomy and physiology regarding lungs. We'll discuss about respiration. The term respiration means the exchange of gases between body cells and the environment. This involves two main processes: breathing, pulmonary ventilation. This is movement of air into and out of the lungs. Exchange of gases. These take place in the lungs, external respiration, in the tissues, internal respiration. What is breathing? Breathing supplies oxygen to the alveoli and eliminates carbon dioxide. Muscles of breathing. Expansion of the chest during inspiration occurs as a result of muscular activity, partly voluntary and partly involuntary. The main muscles used in normal quiet breathing are the external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. Diaphragm. The diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscular structure separating the thoracic and abdominal cavities. It forms the floor of the thoracic cavity and the roof of the abdominal cavity and consists of central tendon from which muscles fibers radiate to be attached to the lower ribs and sternum and to the vertebral columns by two pleurae. When the diaphragm is relaxed, the central tendon is at the level of 8th thoracic vertebra. When it contracts, its muscle fibers shorten and the central tendon is pulled down to the level of the 9th thoracic vertebra, lengthening the thoracic cavity. Accessory muscles of respiration. When extra respiratory efforts is required, additional muscles are used. Forced inspiration is assisted by the muscles and the scalene muscles which link the cervical vertebrae to the first two ribs and increase rib cage expansion. Cycle of breathing. The average respiratory rate is 12 to 15 breaths per minute. Each breath consists of three phases: inspiration, expiration, and pause. Inspiration. What is inspiration? Simultaneous contraction of the external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm expands the thorax as the parietal pleura is firmly adhered to the diaphragm and the inside of the rib cage. It is pulled outward along with them. This pulls the visceral pleura outwards too, since the two pleura are held together by the thin film of pleural fluids. What is expiration? Relaxation of the external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm results in downward and windward movement of the rib cage, the elastic recoil of the lungs. As this occurs, pressure inside the lungs rises and expels air from the respiratory tract. At the end of the expiration, the lungs still contain some air and are prevented from complete collapse by the intact pleura. This process is passive as it does not require the expenditure of energy. Lung volumes and capacities. The normal quiet breathing, there are about 15 complete respiratory cycles per minute. The lungs and the air passages are never empty, and as the Exchange of gases takes place only across the walls of the alveolar ducts and the alveoli. The remaining capacity of the respiratory passage is called the atomical dead space, about 150 ml. Exchange of gases. Although breathing involves the alternating process of inspiration and expiration, gas exchange at the respiratory membrane and in the tissue is a continuous and ongoing process. Diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide depends on pressure differences. Example, between atmospheric air and the blood or blood and the tissues. Now let us. What is diffusion of gases? Exchange of gas occurs when a difference in partial pressure exists across a semi-permeable membrane. Gases move by diffusion from the higher concentration to the lower until equilibrium is established. Atmospheric nitrogen is not used by the body, so its partial pressure remains unchanged and is the same in inspired and expired air, alveolar air, and in the blood. These principles govern the diffusion of gases in and out of the alveoli across the respiratory membrane. Now we'll discuss further detail about respiration in lungs. The human lungs are spongy, cone-shaped organs with the thoracic cavity that facilitate respiration, the process of oxygenating the blood and removing carbon dioxide. Air enters through the conducting zone, nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, which warms and filters it before reaching the respiratory zones, alveoli, where gas exchange occurs. Inhalation, driven by the diaphragm and chest muscles, pulls air into the lungs, while exhalation releases carbon dioxide. This vital process is protected by the pleura, a lubricating membrane, and regulated by the nervous system. Anatomy. Location. The lungs are located in the chest, in either side of the heart, within the thoracic cavity. The lungs are located in the chest thoracic cavity, flanking the heart and protecting by the rib cage. They occupy the chest space from just above the collarbone down to the diaphragm, with their bases resting on the diaphragm and their rounded apexes extending into the root of the neck. The ring lung has three lobes, while the left has two to accommodate the heart. Structure. The right lung has three lobes, while the left lung has two, with a cardiac notch to accommodate the heart. Pleura. Each lung is enclosed in a double-layered membrane called the pleura. The pleural fluid between the layers lubricates and adheres the lungs to the thoracic wall, allowing for smooth movement during breathing. Pleural refers to the pleura, the thin protective membrane that cover the lungs and line the chest cavity. The pleura consists of two layers, the visceral pleura covering the lungs and the parietal pleura lining the chest wall. Between these layers is the pleural cavity, a potential space containing a small amount of lubricating fluid that allows for smooth lung movement during the breathing and helps maintain negative pressure for proper lung function. Airways, trachea, the windpipe leading from the larynx. This is a windpipe. The trachea is a tube-like structure in the neck and upper chest. It stretches from the larynx or voice box to the bronchi and transports air to and from the lungs when a person breathes. Bronchi. The trachea divides into two main bronchi which either each lung. Bronchi are main airways into the lungs. Bronchi is the plural form of the bronchus. It's a bronchi. It's a bronchioles. Air enters your body through your mouth or nose and it passes through the larynx and trachea. The trachea, also called the windpipe, branches into bronchus in each lung. Bronchioles. The bronchi further divide into smaller and smaller bronchioles. These are bronchioles. Alveoli, tiny air sacs at the end of the bronchioles where gas exchange takes place. Tiny air sacs at the end of the bronchioles, that is tiny branches of air tubes in the lungs. The alveoli are where the lungs and the blood exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide during the process of breathing in and breathing out. Oxygen breathed in from the air passes through the alveoli and into the blood and travels to the tissue throughout the body. Carbon dioxide travels in the blood from the body's tissues and passes through the alveoli to be breathed out. In physiology, respiration. Pulmonary ventilations, breathing. Inhaled air travels through the nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, and trachea, then into the bronchi and bronchioles before reaching the alveoli. External respiration. Oxygen from the inhaled air diffuses across the thin alveolar walls and into the blood in the surrounding capillaries. Simultaneously, carbon dioxide, a waste product from the body's tissues, diffuses from the blood into the alveoli to be exhaled. Gas transport. The oxygenated blood travels through the pulmonary veins to the heart, which then pumps into the rest of the body. Cellular respiration. Cells use the delivered oxygen to produce energy, creating carbon dioxide as byproduct by using internal respiration. That's called a cellular respiration. What is internal respiration? The carbon dioxide diffuses from the body tissues into the bloodstream and it is carried back to the lungs to be expelled. Muscles and mechanism. Diaphragm, the dome-shaped muscles at the base of the lungs that contracts during inhalation, creating a vacuum that draws air into the lungs. Intercostal muscles, muscles between the ribs that assist with breathing by expanding the chest cavity. So far, we discussed little about the lungs and that respiration. We have done. Please subscribe our YouTube channel.